Hello everyone, this week we'll be doing a master copy of a John Singer Sargent painting. Because I taught myself in the past by doing these master copies, I encourage you to paint along with me. So I've just listed the colors that I used in this painting, but feel free to use whichever palette you'd like. The most important thing you'd want to get out of a master copy of a John Singer Sargent is acute attention to the values. So I use an odorless paint thinner on the left side of my cup here, and the right side I have a 1/5 stand oil to 4/5 paint thinner mixture. For my setup, I have my iPad to the left of my canvas, and my canvas is as close to my eye level as I can get it. It's important to note that John Singer Sargent was a direct painter, which means that he would start on his canvases directly with oil paint, but it is known that for his larger figurative pieces or multi-figurative pieces, he did do preliminary drawings. And now I don't want you to make this entire painting in the same duration of time of which this video is playing. That is, I don't want you to make the painting in 26 minutes. This one copy actually took me around 6 hours. And most of the time was spent just trying to get my drawing right. And so it's important to know that although we're painting directly with paint and we're using lots of colors and shapes of value, that the overall drawing, that is the overall linear structure of this painting, is extremely intricate. If you'd like to see a video on my Alla Prima painting technique that's a little more simple to understand than this one, I'll leave a link in the description below to my latest Alla Prima portrait painting tutorial. So if you're going to be following along this video with the intention of making the same master copy that I'm making, I recommend spending some time getting the outside shape. So that's what I'm working with at the moment. I'm trying to get the outside shape as simple yet as accurate as possible so that I can build more complex shapes inside. Now I don't want it to be a perfect outline of the outside shape, but I want it to be something that I can work with. And right now I'm actually mixing up right away the dark brown or slightly warm black background that is in the back of this painting. Now academically, master copies are meant to be made in museums or in galleries where you're actually copying directly from the painting. But I don't have that luxury with this painting, and I'm working from a photograph, and I know that the photograph is contrasting the painting a little bit. It's increasing the contrast, so I am aware of that as I'm painting, so I'm not going to make my finished painting as contrasted as the photograph I'm working from. Although the photograph is a very well taken photograph. So as my painting stands right now, I have the general outside shape established, and I've just put in a flat value for the shadow color, and I have the gesture outlined as well. So right now I'm going to be mixing up a generic warmer, darker flesh tone that I'll be covering on the light side of the face with the intention of building lighter and cooler colors on top of it. It is rumored that Sargent worked in this way, where he would build up the values of the face first before placing any features. But please note that he did have a lot of ability in simple linear drawing, that is just drawing with a charcoal pencil or graphite pencil with just light and shadow. So if you're attempting this master copy for the first time without doing a drawing in simple lines, I would recommend to do this. Copy this painting in pencil or charcoal pencil and just sticking with light and shadow. So now that I have my outside shape established and my canvas covered with paint, I'll be mixing the planes that are turning into the shadow. So I'll be mixing simple planes that are turning into the shadow in a way that helps me create a sort of mannequin-like structure of which I can place the features. Now this stage can be pretty frightening, but just know that you're building a structure of which you're going to create more accurate shapes on top of. Those of you that are watching this video with the intent of making the same master copy, I will tell you certain instances where you can actually pause the video and use my painting as a reference, but I wouldn't suggest trying to copy my painting as I'm working. Rather, I will leave certain time intervals where you can pause the video. Now I know that it'll be kind of hard to copy from your computer screen, so that is why I'm telling you that the painting demonstration itself is just a reference to guide you through a Sargent master copy. At this point, you may pause the video and copy directly from the painting if you'd like. And now I'll be using a little bit of burnt umber mixed with a little tiny size 1 brush to re-establish my drawing. So I'm going ahead and making placements for where the eyebrows are going to be placed, which are indicating the structures of the eye sockets. I made a little mark for the form shadow of the side of the face. So at this point I will be taking my time with the drawing, and I'm going to be trying to use the same accuracy as I would if I were working in charcoal pencil or in graphite. Whether I'm working in graphite, charcoal, or oil paint, when I go for the accuracy, I tend to start with the eye sockets or the eye structures. So I try to place the eyes within the outside shape of the head, and I use the eyes and the eyebrow and the tear ducts to kind of put my foot down in the drawing and say, okay, I'm gonna leave these marks here and I'm gonna figure out where the other marks go relative to these marks. Now when I paint or draw, I tend to be more optical than I am measurements oriented, but I do consider horizontal lines. So I'm thinking of where the end of the left eye and the right eye intersect on a horizontal axis, and I think of the distance of the tear ducts, which are the corners, the inside corners of the eyes. I think of where they intersect on a vertical axis with the ends of the nose. So though I'm a very optical painter, I do consider horizontal axes and vertical axes whenever I'm drawing. But you, the viewers, don't have to be that way. You can actually measure the distances however you'd like, and there's no shame in tracing the outlines of the picture directly from your computer screen. Just know that you won't be cheating or anything like that. It's a learning exercise. So if it helps you to copy the outlines of the face, then that's okay, and then you can work on the accuracy after that, after the fact. So I'm trying to draw the curvatures of the eyebrows and the curvatures of the eyelids as exactly as I can to the actual Sargent painting. But please note that doing these Sargent copies are a very, very good exercise in simplification, because Sargent left out a lot of stuff in his paintings, but the further away you get from his paintings, it doesn't even matter. Your eyes fill in the missing gaps. And that's only really achieved through a painter that's really, really simplifying, thinking about structure, and stepping back a lot. Stepping back and being at an arm's length away from your painting is extremely vital. At this point, you may now pause the video and catch up to where I am. So here's the actual Sargent painting itself with the outlines lined out and the values flattened. You may use this for reference as well. So here's my painting with the features generally placed on the face. So let's start some form modeling. So the X that I've drawn out is indicating the lightest plane on the face, and the arrows are indicating the direction of which the form is turning away from the light, therefore getting darker. And this is the actual Sargent painting itself. I just used an app to draw that on. Whenever I'm modeling form, such as the form of the forehead, I start with the area that's facing the light the most, and I'll paint that as light as I can, although I'm not using straight white. I'm using a mostly orange and white with a little cadmium yellow, and I'm painting this right onto the warmer, darker flesh tones that I mixed with the intent of gradating the values across the lightest area and using the paint underneath to help me create that gradation of values. So looking at the forms of the eyes, I've marked out the lightest planes with an X, and then I've drawn the direction of which the forms are turning, therefore getting a little bit darker since they're curving away from the light. And just know that you have to really look at the rate at which the values are turning. For example, the areas underneath the eyebrows are a much faster turn. They're turning into the shadow a lot more rapidly than the areas underneath of the bottom eyelid. Those are planes that are a little more flat, therefore they are slower turns. So the slower the turn, the less obvious the change in value becomes. Notice how obvious the change in values is underneath the eyebrow in comparison to underneath the bottom eyelid. So John Singer Sargent once said, "The thicker you paint, the more it flows." And so I'm trying to use a crap load of paint, really. I'm using a lot of paint, and well, I'm using the most paint after I've drawn out kind of where I think the features are going to go. And the more values I put in, the more structure I put in, the more obvious the drawing will become. So even though I've placed the features, as I'm modeling the form, I can tell if a feature is, say, the width of a brush mark from its true position in space. And once I get to that point, it's really not that difficult to correct the drawing. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using a loaded brush, a brush loaded with a white and a burnt umber and a little bit of cadmium orange flesh tone mix to curve the forms around the face, and I'm using the paint underneath to help the paint travel across the brush and create these curvatures of the form and creating these subtle value shifts. It appears that the model that Sargent painted in this painting is a young child, and so whenever you're painting a child, their eyes tend to be a little bit larger than that of an adult, because when we're babies, our eyeballs are the same size they are when we're older, so our eyes don't really grow. So that's that's one thing to note. And the other is that their faces are more round. So there's less jawbone, there's no real wrinkles yet. So we are considering that with these curvatures of the form. I am curving them more round than I would painting an older model. Though I'm curving the forms and trying to create a three-dimensional object in space, I'm also thinking of the large value relationships as I paint. So the area of the forehead is a plane that is most facing the light, so it's most perpendicular to the light source. And there's also areas parallel to that portion of the forehead on her cheeks. So these areas are much lighter, so let's simplify these values as the forehead, the cheek is 1, the nose is 2, and the area underneath the eyebrow is 3. So as we go from 1 to 3, we get darker more subtly. As I've mentioned in videos before, in an Alla Prima Portrait Painting, each layer that you put on your painting should in theory develop the drawing. So you'll see right now as I'm putting in the values of the lower eyelid in relation to the cheek, I'm also using these brush marks to correct that shape and make it more exacting. So when we're painting Alla Prima, that is, when we're painting wet on wet, we're constantly thinking about the drawing in relation to the shapes around them. See how I just carved the lower eyelid with that brush mark? So I'm making the drawing more accurate, and at the same time I'm building the smaller value relationships. Also, when I do form modeling in areas such as the bottom of her eyelid or the top of her eyebrow, I work areas next to each other. So we human beings are symmetrical. We have bilateral symmetry. So I'll think of a portion, say the bottom eyelid of her right eye, in relation to the bottom eyelid of her left eye. So what you saw in the previous clip was me working on her left eye, but now I'm also going back and forth to the right eye. So I'm working both sides of the face in relation to each other. I don't want to model a form by itself and then moving around, finishing each portion at a time. Although that is something that you do in the end, and you can do that. Many people do that successfully. But I just find that to be more difficult for me in particular. The hard part about copying a John Singer Sargent painting is getting the forms as simple as he did. But in a sense, Sargent's paintings are a little bit elusive, and it looks like he painted with lots of bold brush marks very simply. But if you really take the time to look at those bold brush marks, there's lots of value gradations, there's lots of small tiny structures that he has but very well hidden in his big brush marks, and they show in a way that creates the form and creates volume. So now you can take a second to pause the video to catch up. So now I'm starting to model the areas below the nose. So I picked the lightest portion being the area of the philtrum, and it's facing the light the most, the philtrum being the area directly between the center of the bottom of the nose and the top center of the upper lip. And I'm picking this region because it's the lightest, and I have, once again, a loaded brush with a white, cadmium orange, and a little bit of burnt umber flesh tone mixture. And like I did above, I'm using a gentle brush mark to roll around the forms and using the paint underneath to create these subtle value shifts. The area I'm painting right now is a plane that's facing the light more than the area to the left of it. So it's a plane that's curving very, very, very subtle. The curvature is very subtle, but it is much lighter. All I'm really saying is that her cheeks, the cheeks of her face are protruding and turning into the orbicularis oris, or the area around the mouth. And it's a very complicated form to think of. So if it sounds a little complicated, just know that her face isn't in an exact sphere, but rather it's spherical in nature, but her cheeks are facing the light more, and then they're curving into the mouth, and then they're curving back out from the mouth as you approach the center of the mouth. And as you roll around the side of the model's face, the form is turning further away from the light very rapidly, so that's why I painted that darker plane to the left of the screen right now. And I'm going ahead and carving the shape of the side of the face more accurately while I'm at it. But I will make the curvature more subtle. Sometimes when I want to distinguish a large plane from another, I tend to overdo it. So I'll make the turn much darker. That is the left portion of the face relative to your screen. So the area on the right of the model's face, I painted a darker plane, but I will be making that curve much more subtle. And it's also helpful to look at negative shapes. So I was looking at the shape of the side of the eye and drawing a plumb line to the face. So I'm really thinking of the outside shape, and I'm trying to establish the final touches on that. I'm using a little bit of sap green, burnt umber, some alizarin crimson, and some cadmium red light to mix the color for the shadow area of her top lip. And I'm just going to flatten it out for the time being, and then I'm going to paint the subtle curvatures of the mouth within that shape. So I'll be using a lighter mixture of cadmium red light on top of white, some titanium white, and yellow ochre that's already on my palette as I'm mixing, to create the light portions of the top of her lip. And it's important to know that we are painting from a computer screen and painting from a photograph of the actual Sargent painting, so I'm not completely convinced with the colors that I'm looking at on my computer screen, but I am trying to study the relative values in comparison to one another, because the values will really tell the story of the forms. And though you're painting smaller shapes, make sure to stand back even as much as you did in the beginning. Standing back is really It's a really integral part of making a Sargent type of painting. And now I'm filling in the areas around the canvas with black, and I'm not using direct black. I'm using a little bit of burnt umber and some alizarin crimson in the mixture, because I suspect Sargent didn't use straight black in the background. And I'm not as careful with the color. I'm not as careful with this portion, and that's because it's not too vital to the painting. It's more important that you study the structures of the face. It's more important that you study the simplifications that Sargent made in his portraits rather than the nuances of the clothing that the models wore. It is rather interesting to see the brush marks that Sargent made on that painting, this one painting in particular, because I can clearly tell that he either had a layer underneath of it, as in he didn't paint this Alla Prima, or he painted on top of another painting, which is most likely what happened. Sargent is known to have painted on top of previous paintings. And with the portion of the ear, he really just like that put a single brush mark and then just carved it out. He didn't really put too much information on the ear, although in his painting it really does read like an ear. Remember, if you're attempting to do this master copy, you don't have to focus on getting it exactly right the first time. It does take a few tries. This painting did take me a while. And last but not least, the hair, I used just the flesh colors that I had on my palette with a tiny bit of white, and I made some brush marks for the light planes of the hair, and just the light planes, and I used that to hint at the rest of the hair. Thanks again for watching this week's portrait painting demonstration. Stay tuned for more weekly videos. And if you'd like to see more of my paintings more often, look me up on Instagram as Yupari Fine Art.